Welcome everyone to another NGLCC Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Sabrina Kent. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Senior Vice President here at NGLCC. I am so excited to be with y'all today. We have an incredible presentation coming up as a part of NGLCC's Trans Visibility Week programming. We have Embracing the Gender Expansive Community with our friends from Get Fluid, a certified LGBTBE. But before we jump into it, make sure you're using the Q&A today. We're gonna have time at the end for our presenters. We're even gonna extend things a little further for those who can stick around, about 5 minutes past the hour for all the great questions you're gonna have to share today. As a reminder, we have some other amazing programs coming up as a part of Trans Visibility Week, including our first ever TGNC B2B and B2C matchmakers on Monday, March 29th. You should have already received the information to sign up and take part in that. If you've got questions, reach out to our team at matchmakers@nglcc.org and they'll get you all set up. And then on Tuesday, the 30th, in advance of TDUV on March 31st, we are having our NGLCC celebration of Trans Day of Visibility. So I will drop that link into the chat so you can join us for that program, as well as the community networking session that will follow. But today we are here for a very special conversation led by two amazing leaders in the TGNC community, Hope Giselle, who is director at Get Fluid, and Ray Lindsay, who's manager at Get Fluid. So I'm so excited to have y'all with us. Thank you so much for being a part of Webinar Wednesdays, and I will turn it over to you.
Hey folks, how are you all? So my name is Hope Giselle, and I am the director over at Get Fluid, which is a sister company slash addendum to the Get Fluid project, which I'm sure you all have been made aware of, which was a storefront in New York and is now a virtual shop. And I will let Ray introduce themselves.
Hey folks, my name is Ray Lindsay, pronouns they, them, theirs. Very excited to be here. Currently, I am a student at Columbia Business School, but I'm also working for the Fluid Project on Get Fluid. And we have a great presentation for you today. So looking forward to getting started.
Awesome. So with that being said, we know that you all are going to have so many questions and so many awesome things to ask. And Ray and I wanted to make sure that we were able to really jump into a conversation that helped to support you in whatever questions you had. So first and foremost, we wanted to introduce you to Get Fluid. We wanted to let you know what Get Fluid actually is. And by giving you a little bit of that history and kind of sort of setting the foreground, it'll be able to teach you how we can help you through a couple of different things that we have. Ray is going to share our presentation here in just a second, so you all will be able to see the amazing works that we've been able to do for you all in preparation for this. And there we are, Get Fluid. Behind there, you will see the Fluid Project, which is our sister. We absolutely love the Fluid Project and all of the fashionable ways in which we make statements there. Going into who are we and what we do. The Fluid Project launched in March of 2018 in New York City, right? And this gave access to a bunch of different things. We gave access to genderless clothing. We were the only store of its kind that actually presented and gave way for there to be no gender. When you came into the store, you didn't see a man's section, you didn't see a woman's section, you just saw clothes for everybody, right? Our world is grounded in the purpose and humanity through fashion and community and activism and education. We wanted to expand upon those things, right? We wanted to raise our voice and not just the voices of the people that were making those statements, but the voices of the youth, which often don't get heard. We wanted to make sure that those spaces were not just showing up physically, but virtually, and allowing us to wear the way that we feel and also show authenticity with our clothing in the same way that we show authenticity with our voices. The challenges and the boundaries, right? We wanted to make sure that Fluid was a place of acceptance. We wanted to make sure that it was a place of integrity, openness, fearlessness, balance, and intention. And if you all actually are familiar with Fluid, then a lot of what you'll see, you'll kind of sort of see some of our fragrance names there in those intentions, right? At Fluid, our expression is external, right? But a lot of those things are coming from the internal. We do a lot of the work that we do based off of the way that we feel, and then we showcase those things to the world in order to be seen, heard, understood, and also receive equity and inclusion, which is a lot of what we do at Get Fluid, which is a different portion of our Fluid Project initiative. The North Star. So this is one of those things that we love to bring up. When we talk about our 5-point star, these are our priorities. These are the things that Fluid wants you to know that we stand for just right off the bat. When you think about us, we want you to think about community. We want you to think about retail, e-commerce, partnerships, and then education. The way that these things show up is that in the community, we've been there. We've been a community of folks that creates pop-ups for all of our clothing. We do a lot of activism, and we show up at Pride. So we're there. We know exactly who's doing the work. We know the grassroots organizers. We're not a brand that's focused on getting a bunch of influencers or trying to fly in, you know, Beyonce. We want to make sure that the people that we are supporting are people that support the community and do the work on the ground running first. Retail. So outside of just having stores, outside of just having this really awesome merch that has been showcased in a bunch of different places that you'll see a little bit later, we do wholesale and we also do licensing. So for those people who want to have queer brands, for those people who want to have understanding of what it means to truly be gender expansive with your clothing, we do that as well. E-commerce, right? So the commerce meets the community. This is about opening up opportunity for all people and not just this set people who want to do the work on the basis of being a part of this inclusion movement. It's really about making sure that the folks on the ground running who are actually a part of this movement, who are actually living day to day with these stripes, with the traumas, with all of the things that people have to deal with, not only have a space where they can come to and buy these things, but a space where they can know that they will be able to sell these things themselves should they want to partner with us, which moves us into partnerships. Corporations and nonprofits are all welcome here. We take them big, we take them small, we take them grassroots. If you just talk to us and you reach out to our founder, Rob Smith, who I absolutely love so much, he will walk you through what it means to partner with the Fluid Project, as well as what it means to partner with Get Fluid, which brings me to my last point in the star. Education. At Get Fluid, we want to make sure that we take what we started at the Fluid Project and turn it into an initiative that helps people to grow and learn, not only in your everyday day-to-day living, but also within your corporate sectors. What does your C-suite look like? What does it look like to truly be an educational entity and an educational body, right? So it's about training the corporate folks. It's about training the trainers. It's about understanding what it means to truly be an inclusive, a diverse place that seeks to do equity work, and also being certified in that, which is something that Fluid also offers. Get Fluid is a gender expansive training module, which you're about to learn a little bit about from me and Ray. So Get Fluid is a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program that was curated to provide your company with or organizations with the skills that you needed to spearhead initiatives in the workplace. So for instance, a lot of people will ask us oftentimes, can you guys come in and teach us about what it is that you all do? And can we become a better place for inclusion? First and foremost, one of the things that we love to do is correct people. The first place to start with your expansion is by changing your language, by opening up yourself and you know, kind of sort of removing the way that language is already gendered. Instead of saying you guys, saying folks and, you know, y'all, or can you all or your team come in, it helps us to create a space that already removes the way in which we see gender and the way that we see gender within public and corporate spaces. Our team is a value team of educated folks within community that are specifically trained to do this work around policy, around respect, around cultural and equity practices. And a lot of what we do at Get Fluid is help to expand upon those things to make sure that you understand that this is more so of a training that is about gender expansion, that is about understanding the gender non-conforming experience, and not just this super LGBT wide variety of topics. While we can go there, Get Fluid is about making sure that we understand how to create a space that is diverse, not only in people, but in understanding of the people that walk through those doors. Did you all know that 46% of LGBT employees remain in the closet at work? Did you also know that an unwelcoming workspace can cure reduction of the employment by 30%? What this essentially means is that you lose money when you are not inclusive. A lot of people forget that businesses, while you are corporate, while you might want to do diversity and inclusion, the bottom line to a lot of these conversations is how do we retain the staff that we need to retain so that we can retain the money that we want to make? And the simple answer is be inclusive, be intentional, and also understand that the world will shapeshift along with all of your views that should be shapeshifting in policy, right? Sexual orientation and gender identity expression and inclusion policies increase the job satisfaction and commitment to their employees' health outcomes, right? When people come to work and they know that they're not going to be stressed out or go through traumatic experiences or have to deal with what it means to come into work and have to pretend to be a different gender, they're more likely to perform better, which means that your business, your company, your nonprofit is going to more than likely continue to retain its revenue. That is the basis of what we come in and we do. We remind you of ways to be more influential, more equitable. We remind you of ways to set up systems that will make everyone at the workplace feel seen and also keep you on your toes around ways to be more gender expansive. 77% of Generation Z claim that their company's diversity and inclusion policies are determining factors for where they choose to be employed. What that really means is that the kids who are coming up that are about to be in the job market, the ones that you're seeking to hire, want to know that they can go to work and feel safe. And this is not just people within the community. These are the folks who have family members, and these are the folks who are allies of the community. These things are going to affect your ability to hire. And so Get Fluid comes in and teaches you how to do those things in ways that will continue your revenue stream. Here's a couple of the people that we partner with. Now, I know that you all see some of these huge names. Let's talk a little bit about them, right? We partner with folks like Target and Sephora, where all of our fragrances are located, by the way. We're partnering with people like Lego and HBO and Mattel. We have partnered with so many amazing folks, and we're getting ready to partner with Free People and Bloomberg and all of these folks. As you can see that there's a mix of people. We have folks at the top like Nike, and then we have even smaller businesses like Happy Socks, right? All of these people wanted to find ways that they can be more inclusive. They wanted to find ways that they could maintain their revenue stream, but also ways where they can show that they were about the business of being gender expansive and understanding that this was not just a social trend. It was not just something to post on social media for the sake of saying that you were a part of it, but it was about really being about the work. And all of these people that you see here have been Fluid certified or are on their way to being Fluid certified. So what does an Expansive 101 preview look like? Well, we're not going to give you all everything, but we can give you a smidgen of what we do in these trainings. Our objective with a lot of the trainings is to explain the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity and the uses of privilege that are related to both. Now, I know some of you all are sitting back and saying, well, what privileges, right? And those are questions that you will definitely have answered towards the end of the slide, and Ray is going to help you understand what those privileges look like. Describe the importance of language and the values of the LGBTQIA+ community. While we focus a lot on the gender identity portion, we want you to know that there's language that is going to be reminiscent and valuable for all of those folks within the community. If you don't understand where it came from, then you can't use it correctly in any part or any sector of our community. And so we want to make sure that you understand and you know the importance and the power of your words and how they can affect your staff or your colleagues or anyone that comes into the business to support it financially. We want you to gain a basic understanding of transgender and gender nonconforming people and the terminology that goes along with that, and deepen your understanding of the barriers that trans and gender nonconforming or diverse people face on a daily basis. So what is gender norm socialization, right? So basically, as society, what we do to divide people based on their genders it helps to divide people. And what happens if we ask people to express themselves in ways that don't fit their gender expectations, right? A lot of the times when we do the gender norm socialization, what we do is we force people into the boxes of either male or female. Now, I think that most everyone that is watching this will either know that there's a little bit more to that. There's a spectrum. And while you may not understand completely and fully what that means, what we have to do is break down the idea that we cannot continue to do this gender normalization or this heteronormativity version of what gender is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to show up in social settings. Breaking the binary. A large part of what we do in our 101 trainings is we teach people how to break down what their minds have taught them for the last 34, 45, and sometimes even 60 years, right? We get a lot of different variants of folk that come into these trainings wanting to learn, wanting to be educated, wanting to expand, right? And a lot of them come in with what we like to call an unconscious bias. A lot of the time when you experience homonegativity, trans negativity, gender nonconforming misunderstandings, right? It's not coming from a place that people are intentionally trying to hurt you, but it is coming from a place of unconscious bias, right? Expressing gender is also unconscious. The ways in which we feel and the ways in which gender shows up on us is not something that I think that we all inherently learn. It's something that we feel. It's something that just comes naturally to us. It's something that comes naturally to us in the same way that breathing does. But for those of us whose gender identity or innate sense of your own gender does not match with that, or what was assigned at birth, it's an unraveling experience, and that can be complex and difficult. So gender versus sex, right? They do not equal the same thing, which is why we have that cute little slash through them. Your gender is the way that you show up in the world, and your sex is the way that you show up internally. I like to make sure that I stay away from triggering words like, you know, the thing that you were assigned at birth. A lot of us don't even really resonate with the things that we were assigned at birth. A lot of the times those things are simply medical. And for a lot of us, we want to make sure that we show up with that. We want to make sure that we're honest and we're owning the fact that we get to decide the way that we show up, be it gender or sex, but understanding that sex is usually a medical thing. Those are things that people use for scientific reasons, right? It's who you show up as, and usually those are the things that make the world a little bit more difficult to navigate. The ways in which our gender shows up in the workplace, the ways in which our gender shows up in social settings, the ways in which our gender shows up when we're trying to get a new passport are the things that causes a lot of the trauma that most of us usually have to do work upon work upon work to unravel. Sex assignment and then sex assigned at birth. Commonly referred to as sex, right? We see a social, legal, and medical designation of the sex assigned at birth. AMAB, which is a part of our terms that you'll learn during the training, are assigned male at birth. AFAB, or female, are assigned female at birth. Then you have intersex and other sex assignments. All of these terms are terms that you will learn if you go ahead and you subscribe to us and go ahead and take this training. A lot of what we teach you is how to deal with those terms in ways that you can actually use them in conversation when speaking to people from the community. Intersex people are born with sex characteristics that don't fit typical definitions of male and female. These can include differences in genitals, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics. A lot of the times we find that people will still use outdated terms and words for these that we won't mention here, but we teach you different ways to kind of sort of address folks who fall on this spectrum and do so in a way that's less triggering and harmful. What is gender? Gender is social and cultural. It's how your identity relates to the social idea of what it means to be a man, a woman, neither, both, or a mix of any of the genders, right? So the way that we see gender is based off of the ways in which we want to navigate it both socially and culturally. Those things change depending on what diaspora you are in the world. In India, their gender might show up in a certain way. In America, it might show up in a completely different way. In Australia or Bosnia and all of these different places, gender has a different social and cultural construct. And how you identify those things for yourself will usually depend on where you're from and how you show up in the world. Gender affirmation, the process that a person takes to live and or behave as a member of another gender other than their sex assigned at birth, right? Some transgender people or trans diverse folks may use terms like gender transition or transitioning, or even gender confirmation. All of these may involve a social, a medical, or maybe just legal steps to affirm a person's gender. Affirming the gender does not mean that you are changing your gender. Having a sex change or becoming a man or a woman and the transition is not the same as being trans. What we like to break down for a lot of people when we do these trainings is that you do not have to have surgeries or undergo any sort of medical hormone changes to identify as trans. Those are things that are outdated. Those are things that are usually wildly problematic when being discussed in the workplace or being discussed socially and culturally. And oftentimes they lead people down misinformed paths that we want to disconnect and break over at Get Fluid. And so we do a deep dive in making sure that you understand the difference between gender affirmation and what it actually means to identify yourself as trans. Terminology, we get more into this terminology, which I love and which I'm sure that we can expound upon if we get to a better point in the PowerPoint, but Ray has a lot of great nuggets for you. But we do cover things like sex assignment, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression in the training. All of these things and then some are covered in the course of our Gender 101 training that we do at Get Fluid. The one thing that I do love and that I did not want to leave out of this preview was the umbrella, right? So many folks within and on the outside of the community love the idea of having this umbrella term. And then other people are saying, I have no idea what this means. Well, transgender and what it means to be transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity or gender expression come differently than the ones that they were assigned at birth. This is opposed to a cisgender, right? Or a cisgender person. This term is used to describe people whose gender identity aligns with the sex that they were given at birth, right? And underneath this umbrella, I love all of the things that fall underneath it. You have trans people, bi-gender folks, non-binary folks, gender fluid folks, gender non-conforming folks, agender folks, and gender queer folk. Within our training, we really do a deep dive to help people understand these, because while some of them may seem similar, they all have different meanings and they mean different things to different people. Gender expansive identities outside of the binary are some of the ones that are very, very hard to grasp for a lot of cisgender people who are just learning this, right? So for instance, some of the terms that you might not have heard of are two-spirit and others. When we go into our trainings, we want to make sure that you understand that there are people that are going to come in that might be a part of the two-spirited communities, or people who might identify themselves with terms that you've never heard before. That does not delegitimize the way in which they should show up or be respected in the workplace, in your nonprofit organization, or in your social settings and cultural diversity places within the workplace. I wanted to make sure that you all saw representation. When I look at this photo, I see a bit of every single person or every single group that we've named. We have trans men, we have trans women, we have gender queer, we have bi-queer, we have agender people, we have all types of folks in this one image. And I think that helping you all to see that these people are real, I think that helping you all to see that these people do exist is going to be something that really helps a lot of people understand why Get Fluid training is so important, especially if you are an organization or a corporation that seeks to be more expansive. It's a lot more than being able to understand that there are people that might be hired that have these identities. It's about understanding that there are people who you would not even suspect that have these identities, and that we should always respect the idea that you never can tell or judge a book by its cover until you do the work to dismantle all of the privilege that you have around being cis assumed, or somebody who just genuinely didn't have to learn because you weren't a part of the community. the gender unicorn. Now, I know some of you all are going to look at this as a cute little sketch, but it's one of my favorite things to dismantle and break down. And it's also a really cool way to break down gender to smaller children. There's also another version that I'm sure you all have probably seen with the gingerbread person, which is also a really great one. But I really love the gender unicorn. And as we get into the breakdown of that, it makes it almost child's play for adults who need a very simplistic way to view gender and gender expansion and the expression of gender and the ways in which we look at it when we're talking about these specific things in our workplace trainings. The acronym. What does it even mean, right? A lot of people that come into the training, their first question is, I know that the acronym is LGB something or other, but I have no idea what those letters mean, what they stand for, and how they show up, right? And I think that the most simplistic thing for me and Ray to explain is what those words are. L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, Q, all the way through the plus is where it gets a little tricky, right? So we have queer and questioning, which we do explain a little bit more thoroughly within the training, intersex, which we definitely explain, asexual, and aromantic. And then on top of that, the list just goes on because as we all know, gender is a spectrum. Another umbrella. Now this one's a little bit more colorful and I like this one. So the queer umbrella, and that's an umbrella term that is used to describe all identities within the Encompass LGBTQIA+ acronym. The reason why we separate these umbrellas is because we want to make sure that when we're doing these trainings, that people understand that there are different disparities and there are going to be different sets of understandings when you are talking about being or creating a more inclusive environment for your workplace, corporation, nonprofit, you name it. These things are going to, or this umbrella is going to encompass a bunch of different nuances, and we do cover them within our 101 training. It's been embraced as a positive and politically powerful identity term that can be used for the LGBT community. And I think that using the acronym LGBTQIA+ is something that does feel expansive. It does let people who want to work with, for, or consume your product to know that you have at least a little bit of knowledge and that you can create somewhat of a safe space. A is not for ally. And as we move forward in the next couple of slides, Ray will help you understand exactly what we mean when we say that A is not for ally. A lot of the time in trainings, what I like to remind people is that you cannot dub yourself an ally. So oftentimes, or so many times in the community, we see so many people saying, I'm an ally of the community. I support the community. How many times have we all sat back as queer people on a job or working for a job or in one of our, Zoom meetings, and we heard our CEO come in or our management team come in, or even our C-suite sometimes say, we're allies of this community, but it does not show up in the way that, our work environment is set up. So a lot of the time we have to remind people that allyship is often dubbed or deemed upon you like the queen who would, deem you or knight you as something. It is not something that you get to pick up and put down at your leisure. And Ray will take you through the next couple of slides.
Great, thank you, Hope. So when we talk about allyship, and this is a big part of our trainings, like Hope said, being deemed an ally is kind of an empty term, because to be an ally, you have to actually practice allyship, and an ally is a verb. So the concept of ally, you have to make movement. So you're growing through your journey, just like someone who's, trans, their transition or their gender affirmation, is lifelong. And that's the same with allyship. Allyship is a lifelong journey. You have to build relationships and you have to practice, your allyship and hold yourself accountable for what you're doing and how you're speaking to people. One of the biggest things about allyship is being self-aware. And I think that that's something that regardless of what, or what population, what marginalized group you're an ally to, or you're practicing allyship for, you have to be aware of your own actions and your own unconscious biases. The purpose of allyship is in all, to achieve equity and inclusion. And the sense is that, we were trying to say that A isn't for ally because allies have a certain privilege outside of the LGBTQIA plus community, and they're helping the marginalized group. So they're taking their own identity and helping a group that is less fortunate than they are. So in our trainings, we do a deep dive into pronouns. And for kind of this preview, we give you kind of an idea of what we're going to go over. We first go over kind of the gender norms and the societal norms around pronouns. He, him, his, she, her, hers. We talk about the gender neutral pronouns like mine, they, them, theirs. And then we also do kind of a full lesson on neopronouns, which is something that's newer in the last 30 years. And you'll see more millennials and Gen Zers using neopronouns. We have a few trainers that use neopronouns. These are different terms like ze, zim, her, co. There's some in different languages, like there's one that's pronounced sia. So a lot of people are using neopronouns to self-identify, that they may not identify with the gendered pronouns or the gender neutral pronouns. So just like language, it's always evolving. You'll see some millennials and some Gen Zers now using different identifiers on their body, whether it's wearing blue, pink, and yellow bracelets to determine their gender for that day, or different colored eyeshadow. There's a lot of new things going on for people to express and for them to translate their gender to their surroundings. So Hope touched on this a little bit, but something we do in our training, and it's a really great exercise. I call it intro musical chairs, so to speak. And because of how we're all going in and out of Zoom meetings all day, and I've done it before, saying "Hey guys" instead of all of you, or "What's up, folks." We do this exercise where you kind of have to go through all these different breakout rooms and do a gender neutral introduction, and the last person standing gets praise, and in some of our trainings they get a prize like a gift card. But it's a lot of fun, and it really makes you think about things, and it really makes you have to have intention when you go into a meeting, when you go to speak to someone that's gender neutral. And you can't always assume when you walk into a meeting, even if they're your coworkers, that everyone likes to be called guys, that everyone likes to be called ladies. I know that it's a social thing to call a group of gay men ladies, and that's fine. But if you know that someone in the group doesn't like to be called ladies, you just have to be considerate and conscious of that. So microaggressions. So this is one of the lessons that I really love, because we go into the depth of what a microaggression is and how people that are gender diverse and transgender experience microaggressions. And as part of the LGBTQ plus community, we face them every day. People saying, "Who's the man in the relationship? Who's the woman in the relationship? You're too pretty to be a lesbian. You don't look trans." I feel like I get that one all the time. "You don't look trans." These are microaggressions. And, like Hope was talking about unconscious bias, sometimes microaggressions can be unconscious. They're not intentional. They're just things that people might say and not realize that they're hurtful towards the community. So we try to tackle all of these different unconscious bias and microaggressions to help people recognize when they're doing them. So we also, as part of the Get Fluid training, we focus a lot on the intersectionality of race and gender. And the biggest part of this lesson that we do is on privilege. And as Hope kind of mentioned, we have lessons that focus on, oppression, and then talking about like what it means to fight oppression, what it means like to harness your privilege to fight oppression, and how you rally together with other allies to fight that oppression. So this is a big lesson. We have a whole different section. We have our 101, and then we also have a 201 training, which focuses more on race. And then that privilege lesson, we talk about the differences between cis and hetero privilege. Cis privilege is people that are cisgender, that don't recognize that they have a privilege because they're cisgender. And then heterosexual privilege, people that are heterosexual don't recognize that they have a privilege in itself of being, attracted to someone of the opposite gender, opposite sex. And so, to close off, we wanted to talk about kind of some of the services that we provide. This one being, the employee training that encompasses the Get Fluid certification, which I'll talk about in a second. We also help with policy work, and that's something that we touched upon earlier, which was, when you're talking about, expanding your gender inclusive policies, you have to rewrite a lot of contracts, documentation, job applications, job descriptions, everything needs to be changed. Going through all these documents, and especially from an academic perspective, we're going through all of these different, people's syllabus and their lesson plans. That can translate to, every job description you see on LinkedIn sometimes has he, she, and it, says like sales, it should say salesperson instead of salesman. So these are kind of things that we touch upon, and we go through, and we do like a huge audit of all of the policies and procedure paperwork that company has. We also do, C-suite education and coaching. We do different consulting projects. And of course, our leader and CEO, Rob Smith, does public speaking and does these great presentations for different companies. And so, I touched upon the policy work, and I won't do much more of a deep dive on this because I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. But we do have an attorney that works on our team. And, she has been doing this for, 35 plus years. And she's a great resource that would be on call for anyone that proceeds with the Get Fluid certification. And so to kind of dive into the certification program, you really get a full, hands-on experience where you're going through all of our different lessons plans that are focusing on, gender, race, intersectionality, different intersections between disability, ableism, parents and children, and talking about all of the different ways that gender interacts with our lives, whether that's, in the workplace and in our personal lives, and how we can make better communities and safer spaces for everybody. And that's it. Thank you all. Our email address, if you'd like to collaborate with us, is info@getfluid.com. And thank you so much for having us today. So we'll open up the room for questions.
Thank y'all so much. What a great presentation. I have been loving seeing the comments coming in through the chat as y'all have been sharing. And we'll jump to some of the questions here in the Q&A. So for whichever of you'd like to take this, the first question is can you suggest ways to introduce your pronouns and or names in the workplace? What if you are a freelancer or contractor and worry about finding the balance between being your true self and paying the bills?
I will say, as someone, before I became the director of Get Fluid, I was in that space. And a lot of the time, because in most spaces I was a cis-assumed person, self-identifying was a huge thing for me. To make sure that it was even a place that I wanted to work in, to make sure that it was a place that I wanted to pay my bills in. I recognize that a lot of us do have to often choose whether or not we want to put food on the table or hold true to our morals. But what I find is that having things incorporated into your introduction without you having to introduce yourself is going to be paramount. Put it inside your signature on your email. Whenever you are texting someone, try to use your pronouns as a part of a signature now. I know that we've moved away from the signatures, but I always try to make sure that I incorporate them in. Also, sometimes you can flip the script, right, by asking someone else what their pronouns are, and so that they feel inclined to also, ask you the same things, or then that kind of opens up the door for you to say, oh, well, my pronouns are this as well, right? And so it doesn't put you in this space where you're coming off as a queer person who wants privilege, right? Because that's a thing. But it puts you in a space of being a person who is with the times, right? People know that these conversations are happening. They understand that these are logics that are being being dispersed. And now it's about making sure that you're putting them in spaces where they have to use them, adapt to them, and grow as well.
That's excellent
I would love
advice.
I would love to
Yeah,
add to that too, Sabrina. So to add to what Hope said, something that I kind of took this question to heart. So thank you for asking it. So in my previous job, actually my last two jobs, I put in my signature, she, her, and in my personal life, I knew I went by they, them. It was definitely a difficult experience. And I understand kind of that balance between being your true self and paying the bills. And I had this feeling that I would lose my job if I was my true self. So what I did was, we didn't have a policy at work to put pronouns in signatures, and now it's becoming more well-known. And so I pushed the initiative to the DEI committee that we had at work, and also to the HR, and just said, this is something that's really helpful for the community. Also, putting in ways to pronounce your name. That's been really helpful for people whose name that it's hard to pronounce. And also we just want to prevent any xenophobia occurring at the workplace. So those two things, I mentioned them together. So it didn't necessarily out me at the same time. I said, hey, it's hard to pronounce some names. I don't want to mess it up, / we should put pronouns. That kind of got that out there. And then I eventually, the next job, I put she, her, and then I put a line and put they, them. And I kind of slowly transitioned to being my true self. So hopefully that helps, but that was kind of how I navigated it.
Thanks for that, Ray. And something I would just suggest from a safety perspective, obviously as a freelancer or as small business owners, not everyone has the luxury of being able to choose your clients, but you do have the ability to find out what are protected classes in terms of non-discrimination policies, whether you're looking at the state or local level for where this company is operating, or specifically looking at the company's non-discrimination guidelines. Do they include gender identity and expression? Do they include sexual orientation? And those will be also clear markers to you to help you understand what the company's core values are, or if something were to happen to you, that you would be protected in that circumstance and not lose a contract, for example. And that's something that we're very clear about at NGLCC when we're working with our corporate partners, is they have to have these non-discrimination protections in place, because we don't want to put our LGBTQIs in a situation, in a contracting opportunity situation, where they could fear losing the contract because they bring their full selves to that work. So thank you so much for that, Ray and Hope. And another question we have here, we've got a lot of questions, which is awesome. Just a follow up to the previous question. What about changing your name with existing clients? Should we wait till all legal documents are changed? I'm going to say no, because you are who you are. And as soon as you are identifying as who you are, that should be respected. But Ray or Hope, if there's anything you want to add there.
I think that it's really a nuanced question when you talk about that, right? I think that a lot of us face a bunch of different pressures from folks in your circle who are completely fine with you and want you to be able to express yourself in whatever ways that you show up, no matter where you are. And then there are some times where I agree with Sabrina, where it's just like, once you defined it for yourself, waiting on legal paperwork is not a thing. What I will say is that when we're talking about different institutions, we're talking about work, we're talking about school, we're talking about a bunch of different places where bigots do, reside, and where people who have unconscious bias who also will reside. And so if you are a person who knows that you don't want to have any pushback, then I would definitely say wait on all of your legal paperwork. If you're somebody who knows that there will be pushback, I would definitely say wait on all of your paperwork. But if you know that you're in a place that's a little bit more lenient, or just to piggyback off of Sabrina's last response, if you know that you're in a space where you're going to be protected by policies, right? I don't think that it's necessary to wait until, you have all of that paperwork done, because in some cases it could take as short of a time as 3 months. In some cases, it could take as long as 3 years, right? And it shouldn't take you that long, especially if you plan on being at this space for that juncture of time to be your full and true self. It's just about understanding the nuance of your situation and then attacking it appropriately to where you feel safe and sustained in that decision that you're going to make, but also in a space where you're not putting your mental health at risk to stay at a space that you don't feel like you can do or be yourself with either.
And to add on to that, Hope, and thank you for touching on the mental health part. We do a lesson, and it's kind of an intersection of a lot of policies that are now being in place that are actually going against, different transgender health bills. So, we do touch on this because there are, depending on what state you live in and, where you live, whether, we understand that there can be, legal ramifications. So we do have our lawyer, which I know one of the questions was talking about the information for her, which we're happy to provide the information. There's, we provide, if you're part of the Fluid program, if you get Fluid certified, you'll get free consultation. So if you have either employees or you yourself, need to go through a process and you want to, identify with your legal, with your chosen name, then that is absolutely a question we can help with, and we can walk you through that process. Myself included, that was definitely a process that took time. I'm still in the middle of it. So we're happy to help on any level.
Thank you so much for that. So we're still getting some amazing questions. Thank you all so much. There's one here that I think is really important. That's just a follow up to this conversation around pronouns. And I'm going to summarize what was shared here in the chat. But the idea is this individual was in a trans allyship webinar, and they were told that sharing your identity, your gender identity, as well as your pronouns in introductions and in other spaces as a cis person is important to create not other non-cis folks. So they appreciated that, and they do it themselves, and they want to know if that is something that y'all agree with. And I would say from an NGLCC perspective, no matter what space we're in, we always start by sharing our introductions with our name and our pronouns, because it just creates an inclusive environment and is a signal maybe to folks, even if they're cis or non-cis in the room, that this is an accepting environment. And you never know, a cis person could have a trans brother or sister or sibling, and you don't know who's close to them or what they believe as individuals. So creating that space, I think, creates an ultimate signifier that they are in a welcoming space. But I would love to defer to either one of you for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think with the group of cis folks, I 100% love when I see that, when I experience that, when I'm introducing new coworkers, new classmates, even though they're both cisgendered, they use their pronouns. Also, it goes in line with pronouncing people's names. I think that that's something that just needs to start happening, because, you never want to go around and not know how to pronounce the name if they don't, they say it once. I usually ask for them to pronounce it for me. Stuff like that. So I think that goes along the same line.
Thanks, Ray. And I would just ask Ray, we've got a couple questions here. One about the information for that attorney, if you could drop that into the chat, as well as if y'all have the sources from the stats on the slide about why this is so important at the beginning of the session. If you're able to share that in the chat, that would be awesome. So let's see, so many awesome questions here. Can you talk about gender inclusivity within cis queer workspaces? Queer workspaces, I said that wrong. Cis queer workspaces.
Cis queer workspaces. I think that oftentimes what we do is we make the distinction, or we make the assumption that just because folks are a part of the same community as we are, that they understand the struggles of what it means to be somebody who doesn't identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. And those are just things that are not true. I think that on behalf of the folks who are coming in underneath that trans umbrella, or that non-conforming, or that genderqueer umbrella or identity, it's going to be important to, one, not make those assumptions, right? And to not assume that just because, they're a part of community, that they are not, and that they don't have the capacity to be just as ignorant as cis het people. I think that one of the things that I tend to do is, as the trans person in the space, is remind myself that while it's not my job to educate everyone in this particular moment, that I cannot go in blindly expecting everyone to get it just because everyone in this room is a part of my community. And I think on the opposite spectrum, just understanding and taking the time out to not assume that everyone is cis either, right? I think that on both sides, we have work to do on as equal opportunists and as equal people who want to see diversity happen within our community, to break the binary of the binary understanding that everybody that walks into the room that doesn't appear to be trans is not trans, because those are just assumptions that are archaic and should be done away with. And then also understanding that other assumptions are that just because people are queer, that they understand all portions of that, which is just not true. And so it's just about making space for each other when we are in spaces that do seem to be expansive, but may not have all of the knowledge around the full spectrum of the community.
That's excellent, Hope. And, I really want to call something important out in what you just shared, which goes kind of back to what Ray was saying about active allyship and this idea that it is not it's not the responsibility of the trans or gender diverse person in the room to educate other folks in the space. And I think that's so important. And I think it's great that there are so many folks on today's program that are starting to educate themselves and educate their companies. But I would say the biggest thing that I hear a lot is, we had a trans team member come out, what should we do? And things should not be reactive. That's why there are so many amazing LGBTs like Get Fluid, who are able to help your company along in this TGNC inclusion journey, to help folks understand, to create an environment where folks want to bring their full selves to work. They don't feel ashamed or afraid to come out, and to create an environment that's not reactive to somebody's coming out or a TGNC person joining the team. So I just really wanted to underscore there what Hope just shared about that it's not always going to be her responsibility to walk into a cis room and educate. So in that lane, somebody shared, I know some cis gay men of a certain age have struggled with being labeled queer because of the history of the word being used as a slur. Do you have any guidance on when or how to use this term versus the full acronym? And I would just say to that question too, it's not just cis gay men. There are a lot of folks in the LGBT community who do have uncomfortability with that word. So that's a great question.
I think that when we're talking about all of the terms and all of the language, right? Especially like as a trans woman, I know there are older trans women and trans people as a whole that still use, the words transsexual. And some people find that word to be a slur. Other people find it to be, perfectly fine. A lot of us love Rocky Horror Picture Show, and like one of the songs there is Sweet Transvestite, which we now see as a slur, and other people see it as a part of culture. And so I think that when we're talking about the ways in which we decipher whether or not it's going to be useful, we have to be okay with making boo-boos. We have to be okay with knowing that sometimes you are going to say things that in one cultural group, right, will be perfectly fine. And in other cultural groups, right, depending on what part of the diaspora you're in, once again, this goes back to, we're not a monolithic group of people. Our community is so vast, and everybody deserves to be seen, and everybody's feelings deserve to be validated, that if you are in a space and there are older queer people that say like, these words are triggering for us in a different way, because when we grew up, calling someone a queer meant X, Y, and Z. Just respecting that, acknowledging it, and saying, you know what, I understand that. I see that, I understand. What would you rather I use to make sure that I'm addressing everyone in the room fully without, offending you? And I don't think that there's anything wrong with being able to step back, take a moment to understand where other folks are coming from, resonate with their experience, and then correct yourself, versus going on the defense and, doing what most of us do as younger people and say, well, this is the new way that we're using it. We've adapted this term and, we've taken it back. Like, when you have been traumatized by something, you don't want to hear about how somebody else has adapted it, right? And so it's just about, sometimes just respecting the fact that in this particular space, the culture of this space does not lend itself to whatever affirmations that we have reaffirmed for ourselves. And that's okay as well.
Beautifully stated, Hope. So another question we have here is, how do you handle the gatekeepers that say, in this case, that this gender expansive individual or this person of gender fluid experience is just a quote unquote cisgender man in a dress? How would you handle those gatekeepers?
I want to first and foremost remind people that there are going to be gatekeepers in all communities, and that it's going to be most beneficial for you to know yourself, right? To know yourself, to have a strict understanding of yourself and an understanding of what you know your beliefs and your truths to be. There's always going to be someone at the forefront of every movement, whether it be the Black movement, where it's like, oh, this person is too light to understand what's really happening with Black people, or, you know, the Latinx community, where it's going to be, well, you're too white passing to understand what it means to be called, you know, a slur because you are Mexican, or, you know, somebody who is Asian but is mixed, and so your dad is Black and your mom is Asian, and there's the whole argument around those things, right? And the same thing happens within the queer community. There's always going to be a gatekeeper that says you are not queer enough because technically, if I look at you, you just appear to be a cis person who likes to cross dress, right? And I think that while we can acknowledge the fact that that person is indeed outdated, their thinking is outdated, and the way that they choose to approach that misunderstanding of information, right, is asinine and wrong. It's really going to be more so about looking within and making sure that you're in a space where every single time that happens is just fuel to the fire for you to remember that living in your truth is helping someone else to avoid this situation, and that those gatekeepers eventually have to give up the keys. You know, like there's not a single person that can man a gate for their entire life, and they either learn and grow or they dissipate with the times. And, you know, it's really going to be beneficial for you to remember that that is not going to last always, and that sometimes your qualifications, you know, kind of sort of get you through the door without that key anyway. And those are going to be the things that kind of keep you afloat and keep you going on the days when you do have people that don't see it for your existence and that do want to make a mockery of who you are and how you show up in the world. Ray, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I think you answered it perfectly. I do want to say that, you know, if you have someone in your life that, and I'm sure we all do, I know I do, that experience, and I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible, experience your gender in a way that may be considered disrespectful, or you feel, you know, you're devalued, or, you know, there's, you know, you're kind of, you know, being treated poorly because of their kind of understanding of your gender. It goes back to the self-reflection and the self-awareness. And when someone treats me like this or asks these questions, I instead of kind of being defensive, which I used to be, I ask them, you know, where this feeling comes from, and you know, how they got to this question, and you know, I try to go kind of reverse on them and say, you know, tell me more about where this came from. And I think this is something I do in any argument that I have. And you know, I don't think that you can fight someone on their beliefs of gender. I hope that our trainings do expand people's gender education, but, you know, try to focus on their self-awareness and the self-awareness in the moment. You know, that's the first step to, you know, having people understand each of us and all the different ways that we can express ourselves.
Thank you so much. So we are going to move on to our final question of the day. Thank you all so much for being such engaged participants in today's session. So the final question is, if the legal paperwork hasn't been completed, how can we push for policies that provide for updated names, email addresses, etc., while leaving paychecks, tax forms, and insurance issues alone so we don't have those complications? And I will say a lot of companies are introducing self-ID and other policies and mechanisms to be able to address these exact issues, but I will turn it over to my friends, the experts here.
I will.
Yeah.
I was. Yeah, Sabrina, you cover.
I'll give you some feedback just really quickly. My name is not legally changed yet, but you know, Columbia, for example, the university, every single thing says Ray, everything except one place, which is the one place I don't really have to look ever. I mean, even though I don't really want to look there, it's where my tuition payment is, but that's the only place that my legal name is. And so I have to say that unless they have it stated in some policy, you use the name you want to use. And the only way it's going to come back to you is, yes, tax related, but everything else, use the name you want to use. That's where I've left it all the same. And that's unfortunate, but my email is Ray at whatever. All of my other paperwork is Ray. I say go for it until you hit kind of a wall. But honestly, the world is changing. People are way more understanding, and they try to avoid, sending me the tuition statements with my name on it. And usually I get a very nice, I'm sorry that this is on there in the bottom, which is very sweet of them. So I think that companies and organizations are becoming more and more understanding and open.
That's excellent. And kudos to Columbia for being so conscious and aware. So thank you all again so much for those awesome questions. I just want to close it out here briefly in the last minute or two, and just ask Hope and Ray, or I don't know if y'all have heard this already, so I apologize, but I've almost said Ray of Hope multiple times today. Which I think is awesome with you two paired together. But anyway, I want to ask y'all individually, just briefly, are there any final closing thoughts that you want to impart people with today? Something that they can really take home as a call to action or food for thought moving forward?
As abrasive as this might seem, I want you all to take it with the love that it's met with. And that is to mind the business that pays you. I think that a lot of the time when we are doing a lot of these trainings, there are so many questions that come from employers or C-suites that are just invasive, right? And a lot of the time you think that what you're doing is learning, but what you're really doing is making people unnecessarily uncomfortable. And sometimes it's genuinely just not your business. Well, I think that there is a lot of education that can be and should be and will be done around gender identity and expression and understanding. There's a lot of things that are simply just personal. And so one of the biggest tidbits and one of the hugest thoughts that I want to leave people with is, if you mind the business that pays you, you will never go broke. And so, yeah, that's one of the thoughts that I love to leave people with.
Thank you. Ray?
Sure. So something I always like to say, and it's something that you'll learn more about in our training, but I call it the 3 A's, almost 4 A's. So, allies or allyship inspires people. Advocacy informs, and activism basically intervenes, it changes, it makes change. And I think that y'all being here today is practicing allyship. You're here because you want to be better allies. And I think that taking the next step to being advocates, activists, and the next step is accomplices, which we would learn more about in our training. But I think that taking the next step means that from here, picking a buddy, anybody that's not here in this session, and informing them about today's session or informing them about something you learned today. And that is taking a step. And I think that step just spirals and it rolls down a hill. I mean, I taught one person about the word cisgender. They were like, oh my gosh, I'm cisgender. And they were running around telling everyone. They were very excited about it. So if you learned a new word today, share it with someone else. That's how we, spread the word. That's how we make change. That's my closing thoughts.
Excellent, y'all. Thank you both so much for this and for sharing this space with us. I am loving seeing all these awesome comments coming through the chat. And if y'all liked what you heard, reach out to Rob at thefluidproject.com. You can learn more about how to get engaged with their work and how to bring them in as a resource for your company. Obviously, we at NGLC have a whole database of amazing LGBTBEs that do this work. So this is a really important small taste of the incredible work that Get Fluid can do to support you and your company. Be sure to check them out. And don't forget to join us next week on March 30th for our celebration of Trans Day of Visibility. You can head over to nglcc.org/events for more. And once again, another big thank you to our presenters, Ray and Hope, for today. Y'all were amazing and total disruptors, and I love it. So thank you. Y'all have a great and safe and happy week, and we'll see you back again in a few weeks for the next NGLCC Webinar Wednesdays program. Thanks.